The black SUV screeched to a stop in front of the Grand Hanel Hotel just as rain crashed heavily across the streets of Seoul. Armed bodyguards jumped out first, scanning every corner with cold eyes before opening the back door. Kang Min-yi stepped out slowly. The entire entrance became silent. Hotel workers lowered their heads immediately. Wealthy guests whispered nervously. Even the reporters standing behind the barricades suddenly stopped shouting questions. Everybody in Seoul knew who Kang Min-yi was. The young Korean Mafia boss never smiled, never forgave betrayal, never attended public events unless business forced him to, and tonight he looked angrier than usual. His black suit hugged his tall frame perfectly while rain rolled down his sharp face. One bodyguard hurried forward with an umbrella, but Min-yi pushed it aside. "Where is Director Choi?" he asked coldly. "He is waiting upstairs, sir." Min-yi walked toward the hotel entrance while people quickly moved out of his path. Inside the ballroom, rich women instantly straightened their dresses after seeing him. Some smiled shyly. Others whispered excitedly, "That's Kang Min-yi, the Mafia heir. He's even more handsome in person. I heard he rejected the daughter of a billionaire last month. He never dates anybody." Min-yi ignored every single stare. His expression remained hard, cold, untouchable. The charity gala tonight was organized by powerful businessmen, politicians, and elite families. To everyone else, it looked like a glamorous celebration. But Min-yi knew the truth. Deals would be made tonight. Enemies would smile while hiding knives. And fake people would pretend to care about the poor while drinking expensive wine. He hated events like this. As he entered the private elevator with his bodyguards, his phone rang. It was his mother. Min-yi closed his eyes briefly before answering. "You attended?" she asked immediately. "Good. There are many respectable women there tonight. You are 32 years old already. It is time you stop behaving like a machine. Busy. You are always busy. I have work. You need a wife." Min-yi jaw tightened. "Mother, I am serious. Your father died leaving this empire to you. Do you plan to rule it alone forever?" Min-yi stared ahead silently. His father, the memory still burned like fire. A powerful mafia leader destroyed because he trusted the wrong woman. Love made men weak. That was the lesson Min-yi learned early. Since taking over the organization, he never allowed emotions close to him. No relationships, no distractions, no weakness. "I'll call you later," he said. "You always say that." Ended the call, the elevator doors opened. Director Choi waited nervously inside a luxurious conference room. "Boss Kang." The older man greeted with a bow. Min-yi sat down without speaking. The meeting began immediately. But downstairs, on the first floor near the service hallway, Grace Joanna struggled to balance 3 large trays while rushing through crowded workers. "Grace, hurry up," a female manager snapped. "The VIP guests are complaining again." "Coming," Grace answered quickly. She adjusted the trays carefully before continuing down the hallway. Despite her size, Grace moved surprisingly fast. Sweat covered her forehead. The kitchen was hot. The pressure was worse. One mistake tonight could cost her the temporary job she desperately needed. And she could not afford that. Not with hospital bills waiting. Not with her mother's medication almost finished. Grace finally pushed through the kitchen doors and entered the crowded ballroom area. Some guests looked at her briefly before looking away. Others stared longer. Grace was used to it. A plus-size black woman in the middle of elite Korean society always attracted attention. Some pitied her. Some mocked her. Some acted like she did not belong. But Grace had learned something years ago. People's opinions could not pay bills, so she ignored them. As she placed drinks carefully onto a serving table, 2 wealthy young women nearby began whispering, "She's huge. Why would the hotel hire someone like that? She doesn't fit this place." Grace heard every word, but she simply smiled politely and continued working. One of the older cleaners walked past carrying heavy supplies. Without hesitation, Grace hurried over. "Ma'am, let me help you," she said kindly. The woman looked relieved. "Thank you, dear." Grace carried the heavier box without complaining. From the corner of the room, one bodyguard quietly noticed. People usually behaved differently when rich guests were around, but Grace acted naturally, no pretending, no fake smiles, just kindness. Upstairs, the meeting suddenly became tense. Director Choi wiped sweat from his face. "There's a problem with abuse and shipment," he admitted nervously. Min-yi's eyes darkened. "What kind of problem?" "We suspect there's an informant." The room became silent. One bodyguard stepped forward immediately. "Should we investigate the entire team?" Min-yi leaned back slowly. Investigate. His voice dropped lower. Remove them. Choi swallowed hard. Boss Kang. Minyi stood up. The meeting was over. As he walked toward the hallway, another bodyguard approached carefully. Sir, the chairman of Hanel Group wishes to introduce his daughter to you downstairs. Minyi kept walking. No. She has been waiting all evening. I don't care. The bodyguard fell silent immediately. Everybody knew better than to pressure Kang Minyi. Meanwhile, Grace hurried toward the private hallways carrying fresh documents requested by event organizers. She moved quickly, trying not to be late. Excuse me. Someone shouted behind her. Grace stepped aside immediately. A group of wealthy guests passed arrogantly without acknowledging her. She sighed softly. Long night, she whispered to herself. At the same moment, Minyi exited the conference corridor from the opposite direction. His face remained cold after the stressful meeting. Two bodyguards followed closely behind him. Then suddenly, Grace turned the corner too fast. The papers in her hand slipped slightly. Without fully looking up, she spoke quickly from behind him. Hello, sir, excuse me. Minyi stopped walking completely. The hallway became strangely quiet. Even the bodyguards looked confused. Grace quickly bent down to gather the papers she almost dropped. She still had not properly looked at him. But Minyi remained frozen, that voice, soft, warm, gentle. For some reason, it wrapped around his chest like something he had not felt in years. Peace. The feeling shocked him. His heartbeat slowed, then strangely began beating harder. Grace stood again carefully. Sorry about that, she said politely, then she started walking away. Minyi stared ahead silently. He had not even seen her face. But inside his heart, something impossible happened. A thought entered his mind so clearly that it almost frightened him. I'm going to marry that woman. One of the bodyguards blinked. Sir. Minyi slowly turned around and finally saw her. A plus-size black woman in simple work clothes walked calmly down the hallway carrying papers against her chest. No designer dress, no expensive jewelry, no fake elegance, just natural warmth. The bodyguards exchanged confused looks. Their terrifying boss was actually starring for the first time in years. Grace disappeared around the corner, still unaware. Minyi's eyes remained fixed on the empty hallway. Find her, he said quietly. The bodyguards looked shocked. Sir, the woman who just walked away. One guard hesitated carefully. You mean the worker? Minyi slowly looked at him. The dangerous silence in his eyes immediately made the guard bow. Yes, Boss Kang. Minyi turned away again, but his chest still felt strange. That voice. Why did it feel familiar? Why did hearing two simple words affect him so deeply? He could still hear her saying it. Hello, sir. The warmth in her tone refused to leave his mind. Downstairs, Grace entered the staff room and finally sat down for a moment. My legs are dying, she groaned softly. Another worker laughed. You're surviving better than me. Grace smiled tiredly. I need this paycheck too badly to collapse. Phone suddenly buzzed. The smile on her face faded after seeing the hospital notification. Payment reminder. Grace closed her eyes briefly. Her mother's surgery deadline was getting closer. She had already borrowed money from almost everybody she knew. And still it was not enough. Okay? The other worker asked. Grace forced another smile. Yeah, I'm fine. But she was not fine, not even close. Back upstairs, Minyi stood near the ballroom entrance while guests nervously greeted him. But tonight he barely noticed any of them. His mind remained somewhere else, on a soft voice behind him, on a woman he had never seen before that moment, and on the terrifying realization that for the first time in his life, his heart had made a decision before his mind could stop it. If you're enjoying this story already, take a second to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you never miss the next emotional mafia romance story. Things are only getting started for Grace Joanna and the feared Korean mafia boss. Grace returned to work after the short break, but her mind stayed on the hospital reminder. Every smile she forced now felt heavier. She adjusted her apron and walked back toward the ballroom. The gala had become louder. Champagne glasses clinked. Rich businessmen laughed too loudly. Expensive perfume filled the air. But Grace noticed something else immediately. People looked nervous, more nervous than before. She spotted several armed-looking men standing near the walls pretending to be regular security. Then she heard whispers. Boss Kang is still here. That means the real business hasn't started yet. I heard somebody betrayed his organization. Grace frowned slightly. Boss Kang, who was that? Before she could think deeper about it, the female manager rushed over again. Grace. Yes, Take these drinks to the VIP lounge upstairs and be careful. Those people are very important. Grace grabbed the tray carefully. Okay, as she entered the private elevator, she finally allowed herself one tired sigh. My feet are officially gone, she muttered. The elevator doors opened moments later. The hallway upstairs was quieter, too quiet. Grace walked carefully toward the VIP lounge. Then suddenly 2 men in dark suits stepped into her path. Their expressions were cold, dangerous. "Who are you?" one asked. Grace blinked. "Delivering drinks." The man looked her up and down suspiciously, opened the tray. Grace obeyed immediately. After checking the drinks, the man stepped aside. "You may go in." Grace nodded nervously. The moment she entered the lounge, she immediately felt the tension. Several powerful men sat around expensive tables speaking quietly. And at the center of the room sat the same tall man she nearly bumped into earlier. This time she saw him clearly, sharp jaw, dark eyes, cold expression. The entire room seemed to breathe around him. Grace instantly understood. He was important, very important. Minyi looked up the moment she entered. Their eyes met. And for one strange second, the room disappeared. Grace quickly looked away first. She suddenly felt nervous without understanding why. "Drinks, sir," she said softly while placing the tray down. Minyi continued watching her up close. She looked even more different from the women surrounding his world. No fake smile, no desperate flirting, no fear, just honesty. Director Choi noticed the starring immediately. His eyes widened slightly. Boss King never stared at women, never. Grace finished arranging the glasses. "Anything else?" she asked politely. One wealthy businessman smirked. "You speak Korean well." Grace smiled lightly. "Mother is Korean." Man laughed. "But your father definitely wasn't." A few people chuckled quietly. Grace's smile faded slightly. She was used to comments like that. Before she could answer, Minyi suddenly spoke. "That's enough." Room immediately became silent. The businessman cleared his throat awkwardly. "Of course, Boss Kang." Grace looked toward Minyi in surprise. He was still watching her, not cruelly, not mockingly, just watching. It made her strangely uncomfortable. "Thank you, sir," she said politely before turning to leave. But just before she reached the door, "Wait," she stopped. Slowly turning back, Minyi stood up. The movement alone changed the atmosphere inside the room. Even powerful businessmen looked nervous when he stood. Grace swallowed. He walked closer, tall, calm, dangerous. "Name," he said. "Grace." "Full name." "Joanna." The moment she said it, something flashed briefly across Minyi's face. A strange feeling, like the name touched an old memory he could not fully reach. "Grace Joanna," he repeated quietly. The sound of her name in his deep voice made her chest tighten unexpectedly. "Yes, sir. You work here permanently." "No, temporary event staff." Minyi nodded slowly. Then he said something that shocked the entire room. "Leave the tray. Sit down." Grace blinked. "What?" I said. "Sit." The businessmen exchanged stunned looks. One bodyguard nearly looked confused. Grace laughed nervously. "I don't think your guests would like that very much." For the first time all evening, the corner of Minyi's lips moved slightly, not a full smile, but close. "I'm not asking them." The room became even more shocked. Grace looked around awkwardly. Every eye inside the lounge was now on her. "I really should get back to work," she said carefully. Minyi studied her quietly for another moment, then finally nodded. Grace bowed politely before leaving quickly. The second the door closed behind her, Director Choi stared openly. "Boss Kang." Minyi sat back down calmly. "What?" The older man hesitated. "All the years I've known you, I have never seen you speak to a woman like that." Minyi picked up a glass slowly. Neither had he. Meanwhile, Grace leaned against the hallway wall outside. "What was that?" she whispered. Her heart beat strangely fast. That man's eyes felt intense, too intense, almost like he was looking directly inside her. Another worker approached. "Grace, there you are." "You know the guy inside that room?" Grace asked. The worker looked horrified. "You don't know who that is?" Grace shook her head. "That's Kang Minyi." Grace waited. The worker lowered her voice. "The Mafia boss." Grace froze. "What?" "They say he controls half the underground businesses in Seoul." Grace stared toward the lounge door. "That man," the worker nodded quickly, "and they say he's terrifying. My cousin worked at another hotel he visited once. Somebody made a mistake and disappeared from their job the next day." Grace's stomach tight. She suddenly replayed every interaction she just had with him, the starring, the questions, the strange intensity. "Why was he talking to me?" she whispered. "I don't know," the worker admitted. But everybody in there looked shocked. Grace suddenly felt uneasy, very uneasy. Back inside the lounge, the business meeting continued, but Minyi barely listened. His attention stayed on Grace. Grace, Joanna, even her name felt warm. He hated how interested he already was, hated how his mind kept replaying her voice. One businessman finally laughed carefully. Boss Kang seems unusually interested tonight. The room became tense immediately. Nobody joked with Min Yi. But surprisingly, Min Yi did not react angrily. Instead, he simply asked, "What do you know about her?" Director Choi almost choked on his drink. "You mean the woman?" "Yes." One bodyguard immediately answered. "She's 28, Korean mother, Nigerian father, works temporary jobs, lives in Mapo district." Min Yi's eyes narrowed slightly. "You investigated already. You told us to find her, sir." Min Yi leaned back quietly. "Continue." "She currently has financial difficulties. Mother is sick. Surgery expenses." Something cold moved through Min Yi's chest. "She handles it alone." "Yes, sir." Pause then. "No husband, no boyfriend that we could find." One businessman laughed softly. "Beautiful opportunity for you then, Boss Kang." Min Yi slowly looked at him. The laughter died immediately. Nobody spoke again. Minutes later, the meeting finally ended. Guests began leaving the private lounge carefully. But Min Yi remained seated alone. His bodyguard approached cautiously. "Sir, your car is ready." Min Yi stayed silent. Then suddenly asked, "Do you believe people can recognize someone before understanding why?" The bodyguard blinked. "Sir, that voice." Even saying it aloud felt strange. She sounded familiar. The bodyguard carefully chose his words. "Perhaps you met her before." Min Yi's eyes darkened thoughtfully. "Maybe. Or maybe something worse. Maybe she was becoming important." And important things always became dangerous in his world. Downstairs, Grace finished another exhausting task before finally checking her phone again. 3 missed calls from the hospital. Fear rushed into her chest instantly. She stepped into an empty hallway and called back quickly. "This is Grace, Joanna." "Joanna, your mother's condition became unstable earlier tonight." Grace's heart dropped. "What happened?" "She's stable again for now, but the surgery cannot wait much longer." Grace closed her eyes. "How much time do we have?" "Very little," burned behind her eyes. "I understand." The call ended. Grace leaned against the wall quietly. For a moment, the strong woman everybody saw finally cracked. "What am I supposed to do?" she whispered brokenly. She covered her face. The pressure was becoming unbearable. And at that exact moment, Min Yi stepped into the hallway from the opposite side. He stopped immediately after seeing her. Grace quickly wiped her eyes, embarrassed. "I'm sorry," she said softly. "I didn't know anybody was here." Min Yi stared at her silently. Then something dangerous happened, for the first time in many years. The feared Korean Mafia boss felt the sudden, overwhelming urge to protect someone. If you're still watching and enjoying this emotional story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel right now, because Grace and Min Yi's journey is about to become even more intense. Min Yi stood motionless at the far end of the hallway while Grace quickly tried to compose herself. She wiped the tears from her cheeks and forced out an embarrassed laugh. "Sorry," she said quietly. "Long night." But Min Yi did not move, did not speak. He simply watched her, and somehow that silence felt heavier than words. Grace straightened herself awkwardly. "I should get back to work." She tried walking past him, then his deep voice stopped her. "Your mother dying?" Grace froze instantly. The question hit too directly, too personally. Slowly, she turned back toward him. Her eyes searched his face carefully now. Who asked something like that so calmly? But strangely, she did not feel mocked. She felt seen. Grace swallowed hard. "She's sick," she answered softly. Min Yi's eyes remained fixed on her. "What illness?" Grace hesitated. Most people lost interest whenever conversations became serious. They preferred shallow kindness, temporary sympathy, but something about him made her answer honestly. "Heart complications," she admitted quietly. "She needs surgery." "Much?" Grace blinked. "Much is the surgery." She shook her head immediately. "It's okay." "I didn't ask if it was okay." Grace stared at him in disbelief. Who was this man? He spoke like somebody used to controlling every situation around him, and somehow people obeyed him naturally. "I can handle it," Grace said carefully. Min Yi noticed the lie immediately. No, she could not handle it. Her tired eyes already revealed that. The pressure, the exhaustion, the fear. He had seen many desperate people in his world before. Grace felt different. She carried pain quietly, without bitterness, without manipulation, without trying to gain pity. And somehow that affected him more than it should. "You were crying," he said calmly. Grace looked away immediately. "That's embarrassing." "It's human." Answer surprised her. She looked back at him slowly. For a dangerous mafia boss, he spoke unexpectedly gently, not warm exactly, but careful. controlled, almost like he was trying not to scare her. "I'm fine," she whispered. Minyi took one slow step closer. "You're not." Grace's heartbeat suddenly became uneven. This man's presence was overwhelming up close, tall, sharp, calm in a terrifying way. Even his silence carried power. And yet his eyes no longer looked cold, not completely. A loud voice suddenly interrupted the moment. "Boss Kang." One of his bodyguards rushed toward them quickly. "There's a problem downstairs." Immediately, Minyi's expression changed again. The softness disappeared, coldness returned instantly. Grace noticed it immediately, like watching somebody put armor back on. "What happened?" Minyi asked. "The Disung group arrived unexpectedly." Minyi's jaw tightened. "I told them not to attend." "They insisted." The first time Grace saw something dangerous move across his face, not anger, worse, calculation. The bodyguard lowered his voice. "We suspect they're planning something." Minyi looked toward Grace briefly before speaking again. "Handle it." "Yes, sir." The bodyguard hurried away. Grace cleared her throat awkwardly. "You should probably go." Minyi remained still for another moment, then finally, "What time do you finish work?" Grace blinked. "Why?" I asked a question. She crossed her arms slightly. "I'm asking why." For one brief second, Minyi almost smiled again. Almost. Nobody questioned him this way, certainly not while looking directly into his eyes. "Answer me first," he said. Grace hesitated. "Midnight." Minyi nodded once. Then he turned and walked away without another word. Grace stared after him in confusion. "What kind of man is this?" she whispered. But downstairs, the atmosphere inside the ballroom had changed completely. The moment Minyi entered again, tension spread through the room. Across the ballroom stood another group of powerful men dressed in dark suits. Their leader smiled coldly after spotting him. Kang Minyi. Minyi stopped several feet away. Sung-ho. The air between them became instantly dangerous. Guests nearby slowly moved away. Even Grace noticed the tension immediately from across the room. One older worker whispered nervously beside her. "That's bad," Grace asked. The woman lowered her voice further. "The Disung Syndicate." Grace frowned. "I don't understand. They're enemies." Grace's stomach tightened immediately. Enemies, as in real Mafia enemies. Before she could process anything further, Lee Sung-ho laughed loudly. "You should smile more, Min-yi. People might think you're unhappy to see me." Min-yi's expression remained blank. "You were not invited. Yet here I am." Several bodyguards subtly reached beneath their jackets. The ballroom suddenly felt suffocating. Grace watched nervously while pretending to arrange glasses nearby. Something terrible was about to happen. She could feel it. Lee Sung-ho glanced around dramatically. "Beautiful party," he said. "Expensive, too." Then his eyes landed briefly on Grace. A cruel smile appeared. "But your workers could be upgraded." Immediately looked away. She already knew that look, mocking, judging, humiliating. But before Sung-ho could continue, Min-yi suddenly stepped slightly forward. The movement alone silenced the room. "You came here to talk business," Min-yi said coldly. "Then talk." Sung-ho smirked. "Fine." He moved closer. "But let's skip the fake politeness. We both know Seoul is becoming too small for two organizations." The room became deadly quiet. Grace could barely breathe now. This was not business. This was war hidden behind expensive suits. Lee Sung-ho smiled again. "Sooner or later, one of us will disappear." Min-yi's face remained unreadable. "Then pray it isn't you." The threat landed heavily. Even Grace felt chills hearing it. Sung-ho laughed loudly. "You always were dramatic." Then suddenly, a loud crash exploded nearby. One frightened waiter accidentally dropped an entire tray of glasses. The sharp sound shattered across the ballroom. Everybody jumped. One bodyguard instantly pulled a weapon halfway out. Women screamed. Panic spread immediately. Grace's heart nearly stopped. But what happened next shocked her most. The second chaos erupted. Min-yi's eyes searched the room instantly, not for enemies, for her. Their eyes met across the ballroom. And somehow, in the middle of all that danger, Grace felt strangely safe. The waiter fell to the floor, apologizing repeatedly. "Sorry, I'm sorry." The tension slowly eased after security realized it was an accident. Lee Sung-ho laughed mockingly. "People are nervous tonight." Min-yi ignored him completely. Instead, he kept staring toward Grace. And Sung-ho noticed. His smile slowly faded, very slowly. Then his eyes narrowed. "Interesting, very interesting." After several more tense exchanges, the rival group finally left the ballroom. But the damage was already done. The atmosphere never fully recovered. Guests whispered nervously, while many quietly began leaving early. Grace helped workers clean broken glass while replaying the strange moment in her head. Why had Minyi looked for her first? Why did that matter to her, and why was she still thinking about him at all? Grace, she looked up quickly, the female manager hurried over. The VIP lounge requested fresh drinks again. Grace almost groaned. My legs are falling off. Well, they need you upstairs. Grace grabbed another tray reluctantly. As she entered the private hallway again, she noticed two guards standing outside now, much stricter security than before. One opened the door for her silently. Inside, Minyi sat alone this time. The large room felt quieter now, darker somehow. Grace carefully placed the tray down. You people drink a lot, she joked lightly before thinking. The words slipped out naturally. Immediately, one bodyguard looked horrified. Nobody joked casually with Kang Minyi. But surprisingly, Minyi looked at her calmly, then said, "You talk a lot." Grace blinked. Was that teasing? She folded her arms. That's because somebody in this room barely talks at all. One bodyguard looked ready to faint. Grace noticed the reaction immediately. What, Min? Yi slowly dismissed the guards with one gesture. Leave us. The men hesitated briefly, then obeyed. The door closed behind them. Now Grace suddenly felt nervous again, very nervous. Being alone with a mafia boss suddenly sounded like a terrible life decision. Min Yi stood slowly. You're afraid now. Grace laughed awkwardly. Shouldn't I be? Do you think I'll hurt you? She looked into his eyes carefully. Honestly, no. That was the strange part. I don't know, she admitted. Minyi moved closer again, not threateningly, but intentionally. Most people fear me immediately. Grace smiled slightly. Well, you do look terrifying. This time Minyi actually smiled faintly, a real smile, small, brief, but real, and Grace suddenly understood why women obsessed over him. That tiny smile changed his entire face. Unfortunately for her heart, it changed the room too. You shouldn't smile suddenly like that, she muttered. Yi raised an eyebrow. Why? Grace shook her head quickly. Never mind. He noticed the slight blush on her cheeks, and for some reason seeing that blush affected him more than threats ever could. You're different around me, he said quietly. Grace frowned. What does that mean? You don't pretend. She looked down briefly. Pretending is exhausting. Minyi studied her face carefully now, every expression, every nervous movement, every honest emotion. Nothing about her felt calculated, and in his dangerous world. That made her rare, dangerously rare. Then suddenly Grace's phone rang loudly. She checked the screen. Hospital. Fear instantly returned to her face. Minyi noticed immediately. Answer it. Grace picked up quickly. Yes, her expression changed after only seconds. What? Panic entered her voice. I'm coming right now. The call ended. Grace grabbed her bag immediately. Mother collapsed. Minyi's expression hardened. Where? Seoul's Central Hospital. Grace hurried toward the door, but Minyi caught her wrist gently. I'll take you. Grace looked shocked. That's okay. I wasn't asking. Their eyes locked again. And this time Grace saw something powerful inside his gaze: determination, possession, protection. The kind that could move mountains or destroy enemies. And for the first time all night, Joanna realized the feared Korean mafia boss was no longer simply interested in her. He had already decided she belonged in his life. Rain hit the SUV windows heavily while the convoy sped through the glowing streets of Seoul. Grace sat quietly beside Kang Minyi, still trying to understand how her night had become this strange. One moment she had been carrying drinks at a charity event. Now she was riding through Seoul with one of the most feared men in the country. Nothing about this felt real. Minyi sat calmly beside her while checking messages on his phone. But every few seconds his eyes moved back toward her, watching, studying, almost protecting. Grace noticed it, and honestly, it made her nervous. You keep starring, she said finally. Minyi looked directly at her. You keep noticing. Grace rolled her eyes softly. Well, it's hard not to notice. For a brief second, silence filled the car again. Then unexpectedly, Minyi asked, why didn't you ask me for help? Grace frowned. People would. With my mother. Yes. Grace looked out the rain-covered window quietly. Because people usually help expecting something back. Minyi's eyes narrowed slightly. And you think I do? I don't know you. Honesty made him strangely calm. Most people feared offending him. Grace simply spoke truthfully. I've learned something, she continued softly. Nothing expensive comes freely. Minyi leaned back slowly. You think I'm expensive? Grace laughed tiredly. You arrived at a hotel with 8 black SUVs and armed men. Of course you're expensive. One bodyguard sitting in front almost smiled. Minyi noticed through the mirror. Everybody around him looked more relaxed tonight. That alone was unusual. Grace had changed the atmosphere around him without even trying. The SUV suddenly turned sharply into the hospital entrance. Grace immediately grabbed her bag. The moment the vehicle stopped, she rushed out quickly. "Grace," Minyi called. She turned back. "Thank you," she said sincerely before running inside. Minyi watched her disappear through the hospital doors. Something inside his chest tightened unexpectedly. One bodyguard stepped closer carefully. "Sir, should we wait outside?" Minyi kept staring ahead. The bodyguard blinked. "Sir, I'm going inside." The bodyguards exchanged quick looks. Tonight truly felt unbelievable. Kang Minyi hated hospitals. After his father died years ago, he avoided them completely. Yet now he walked calmly through automatic glass doors chasing after a woman he met only hours earlier. Inside the emergency hallway, Grace rushed toward the reception desk desperately. "Mother Grace Joanna, they called me." The nurse checked quickly. "She's stable now." Nearly collapsed from relief. "Can I see her?" One moment. Grace closed her eyes while breathing shakily. Thank God, thank God. Then suddenly she noticed people staring nearby. She looked behind herself. Minyi had just entered the hospital surrounded by bodyguards. The atmosphere changed instantly. Nurses whispered, doctors moved nervously, even security guards straightened immediately. Grace stared in disbelief. People react like this everywhere you go. Minyi walked toward her calmly. "That's terrifying. It's useful." Shook her head. "You really are strange." Something about the comment amused him. Before he could answer, a doctor approached nervously. "Miss Joanna," Grace turned immediately. "Yes, how is she?" The doctor sighed softly. "Your mother's condition is becoming more unstable. We need to schedule surgery immediately." Grace's face slowly lost color. "Much time do we have?" "Not long." "The payment?" The doctor hesitated. Grace already knew that hesitation, the kind that came before bad news. "We still need confirmation of the full deposit." Grace lowered her eyes quietly. Minyi watched every emotion cross her face: fear, exhaustion, helplessness, but still no begging, no manipulation. She simply accepted the pain silently, and somehow that hurt him more than if she cried loudly. "How much?" Minyi asked calmly. The doctor immediately recognized him. His expression changed instantly. "Boss Kang, we—" "How much?" The doctor swallowed. 120 million won. Grace's chest tightened painfully. The amount sounded impossible every time she heard it. Minyi barely reacted. "Schedule the surgery." Grace's eyes widened immediately. The doctor looked confused between them. Minyi turned toward Grace slowly. "No, you can't just pay for my mother's surgery." "Why not?" "Because that's too much money." "It's not. For normal people it is." Minyi stayed silent briefly, then asked quietly, "Are you refusing because of pride?" Grace stared at him. "No. I'm refusing because I don't understand why you care." The words landed heavily between them. Finally, the real question. Why did he care honestly? Minyi himself did not fully understand it yet. He only knew one thing: the thought of Grace suffering felt unbearable, and he was not used to unbearable feelings. "You helped strangers tonight," he said calmly. Grace blinked. "What?" "The older cleaner, the workers, even people mocking you." She looked confused. "So, you're kind naturally." Grace frowned slightly. "That's not a reason to spend millions on somebody." Minyi stepped closer. "For me, it is." Breath caught slightly. Nobody had ever looked at her the way he was looking now, not because of pity, not because of curiosity, not because of her body, but like she mattered, like he had already decided her pain mattered too. Grace quickly looked away first. "That's dangerous," she whispered. "What is?" "The way you talk." Minyi's eyes stayed on her face. "Does it scare you?" Grace laughed nervously. "Yes." For the first time in years, Minyi answered honestly too. "Good." Grace looked back at him in shock. Then suddenly a loud voice interrupted them. "Minyi!" Everyone turned. An elegant older woman approached quickly down the hallway surrounded by assistants. Grace instantly noticed the expensive clothing, the cold authority, the sharp eyes. This woman carried power too. And the moment she looked at Grace, disapproval appeared immediately. "Kang Minyi," the woman said coldly. "Why are you at a hospital in the middle of the night?" "Mother." Grace's stomach tightened instantly. "Mother, oh no." The older woman looked Grace up and down slowly. Every second felt uncomfortable. Then she turned back toward Minyi. "Who is this?" Grace opened her mouth politely. "Hello, ma'am, my name is—" "I asked my son." Dismissal hit sharply. Minyi's expression darkened immediately. "Her name is Grace Joanna." His mother's eyes narrowed slightly. "The worker from the gala." So she already knew. Of course she knew. Powerful families always knew everything quickly. Minyi answered calmly. "And why exactly are you here with her?" Grace suddenly felt very small standing there, very aware of her simple clothes, her size, her exhausted face. Minyi answered without hesitation, "Because I brought her." His mother stared at him carefully now. Then something dangerous flashed across her expression. Understanding, she noticed it immediately. The interest, the attention, the softness he never showed women before. And she hated it instantly. Min Yi, she said quietly, a word, busy. This is important. Min Yi looked toward Grace briefly. Wait here. Grace nodded awkwardly. As mother and son walked several feet away, the older woman's calm mask immediately disappeared. What are you doing? She hissed. Min Yi's expression remained unreadable. She needs help. She is not your responsibility. She is now. His mother stared at him in disbelief. You cannot be serious. Min Yi said nothing. And somehow that silence frightened her more. You barely know this woman. I know enough. She works temporary jobs, so she is completely unsuitable. His eyes slowly hardened, careful. His mother continued anyway. There are respectable women waiting for you, educated women, powerful women. Min Yi's voice became dangerously calm, and yet none of them matter. Older woman looked stunned, then furious. You are embarrassing yourself. No, Min Yi replied quietly. I'm making a decision. Meanwhile, Grace pretended not to listen while anxiety twisted inside her chest. She already understood what this was. A rich, powerful family seeing her as unacceptable. Honestly, she was used to it. But for some reason, this rejection hurt more. Because part of her had already started believing Min Yi saw her differently. His mother finally looked toward Grace again, coldly. Then she walked away without another word. The hallway became silent. Grace forced a small laugh. Well, she hates me. Min Yi walked back toward her calmly. She hates everyone. I don't think that's true. It is. Grace crossed her arms. You should probably go after her. No, she's your mother. You're here. Answer came too quickly, too naturally. Grace stared at him speechlessly. This man really meant every word he said. And somehow that was becoming the most dangerous thing about him. Because little by little, Grace, Joanna could feel herself beginning to care too. Grace could barely sleep after returning home that night. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Kang Min Yi's face again. The way he looked at her, the way he spoke. The way he stood beside her against his own mother without hesitation. Nothing about him made sense. And honestly, that frightened her more than his Mafia reputation. Grace sat quietly beside her mother's hospital bed early the next morning while soft sunlight entered through the curtains. Her mother slowly opened her eyes. Grace. Grace immediately smiled. Hey, Mama. Her mother looked weak but peaceful. You stayed all night again, Grace shrugged lightly. Where else would I be? Her mother reached for her hand slowly. You look tired. Grace forced another smile. I'm okay. Her mother knew her too well. You've been crying. Grace looked away immediately. Mama, what's wrong? Grace hesitated. How exactly was she supposed to explain this situation? A terrifying Korean mafia boss suddenly entering her life and acting like she already belonged to him. Even saying it aloud sounded ridiculous. Before Grace could answer, the hospital room door opened softly, and both women looked up. Min Yi entered calmly carrying fresh flowers. Grace froze immediately. What are you doing here? Min Yi looked toward her mother first. Good morning. Grace's mother blinked in surprise. The man standing inside the room looked rich enough to own the entire hospital. Expensive black suit, cold eyes, powerful presence, yet strangely respectful. You came back, Grace asked softly. I said I would. Grace honestly did not know what to say anymore. Min Yi walked toward the bed and carefully placed the flowers nearby. For you, he told Grace's mother. The older woman smiled gently. Well, aren't you handsome? Almost choked. Her mother asked innocently. I'm old, not blind. Shockingly, Min Yi looked slightly amused, very slightly. Grace noticed immediately, and unfortunately it made her heart react again. This is Kang Min Yi, Grace explained carefully. Her mother's eyes widened slightly. The businessman, Grace hesitated awkwardly. Something like that. Min Yi remained silent, probably because explaining Mafia leadership during hospital visits sounded complicated. Grace's mother smiled warmly. Thank you for helping my daughter last night. Min Yi looked toward Grace quietly before answering. I wanted to. That answer again, simple, direct, dangerously sincere. Grace quickly stood up. I'll get coffee. She practically escaped the room. The hallway outside felt easier to breathe in. What was happening to her life? She leaned against the wall while holding her chest lightly. This man was becoming overwhelming, not because he was cruel, because he was serious. That was somehow scarier. You're avoiding him. Nearly jumped after hearing the voice beside her. An older nurse smiled knowingly. Not avoiding anybody. Grace laughed nervously. It's not like that. Nurse glanced toward the hospital room. That man has been asking doctors about your mother since dawn. Grace's expression slowly changed. Arrived before sunrise. Her heartbeat suddenly became uneven again. Nurse smiled softly. You should ask him. The room, Grace's mother quietly studied Minyi while he stood near the window. You care about my daughter. Minyi looked toward her calmly. Was the first time he admitted it aloud. Strangely, it felt good. Grace's mother smiled gently. She's a good woman. I know, but she has suffered a lot. Something cold moved behind Minyi's eyes. I know that too. Older woman watched him carefully now. You look dangerous. Most people would never dare say that directly, but Minyi respected honesty. I am. Yet you look at my daughter softly. Comment surprisingly silenced him, because it was true. He did look at Grace differently. Like his mind stopped fighting whenever she appeared, like the constant pressure inside him disappeared around her. He had no explanation for it, only certainty. The hospital door opened again. Grace returned holding coffee cups carefully. I survived the coffee machine, she announced lightly. Her mother laughed softly. You two were talking about me? Grace narrowed her eyes suspiciously. That sounds dangerous. Dangerous, her mother teased. Grace handed Minyi his coffee carefully. Their fingers brushed slightly. A small touch, but somehow both of them noticed it immediately. Grace quickly looked away first. Unfortunately, her mother noticed that too, and suddenly looked very interested. Several hours later, Grace finally convinced her mother to rest again. As they exited the hospital room quietly, Minyi's phone suddenly rang. His expression changed instantly after checking the screen. Cold again, dangerous again. Grace noticed immediately. Everything okay? Minyi answered the call without looking away from her. Yes. A voice spoke urgently through the phone. Boss, we found the informant. Minyi's eyes darkened slightly. Where? He trying to leave Seoul. Stop him. Grace could not hear the full conversation, but she heard enough, and suddenly remembered again exactly who this man was. Not just rich, not just powerful, dangerous, very dangerous. The call ended. Minyi looked toward her calmly. I have work. Grace folded her arms slowly. Mafia work. The corner of his jaw tightened slightly. You're afraid again. Grace sighed softly. I'm trying not to be. That answer affected him strangely, because she had not walked away yet. Most people would. Most people feared him once they saw the truth, but Grace remained standing there, still trying. I won't lie to you, Minyi said quietly. My world is dangerous. Grace looked into his eyes carefully. Then why pull me into it? Because I already need you. The answer almost escaped his mouth, but Minyi swallowed it back too soon. Instead, he stepped closer slowly. I told you already. Grace's heartbeat sped up again. You're upset when I say things like that. Because you say them too seriously. I am serious. It was again that dangerous honesty. Grace rubbed her forehead tiredly. You barely know me. I know enough. No, you, Minyi studied her quietly. You take care of people even when you're exhausted. You hide pain so others won't worry. You laugh when you're scared. And you pretend to be stronger than you feel. Grace stared at him speechlessly. How did he notice all that already? You observe too much, she whispered. I observe you. Fell heavily between them, then suddenly several men in black suits entered the hallway quickly. Their expressions looked tense. One bowed immediately. Boss Kang. Minyi turned cold instantly again. What happened? There was an attack at the Western warehouse. Grace's stomach tightened. Attack, the man continued urgently. We suspect Disung was responsible. Minyi's eyes hardened dangerously. Casualties. 2 injured. Hallway atmosphere changed immediately. Even the air felt colder now. Grace finally saw the true side of Kang Minyi's world: violence, blood, power, war hidden beneath expensive suits. One guard noticed Grace standing nearby and lowered his voice. But Minyi spoke calmly anyway. Prepare the vehicles. Yes, sir. The men hurried away. Grace looked toward Minyi carefully. You're leaving. Yes. To do what? Minyi stayed silent, and honestly, that silence answered enough. Grace crossed her arms tightly. This is crazy. Is you acting like you care about me while casually walking into dangerous situations? Minyi stepped closer. Danger existed in my life long before you appeared. That's not comforting. A faint softness returned briefly to his eyes. It wasn't supposed to be. Looked away frustrated. She hated this strange fear growing inside her chest already. Fear for him. How was that possible after only one night? You should stay away from me, Minyi said suddenly. Grace looked back at him in shock. What? My enemies will notice eventually. The words landed heavily, because deep down Grace already understood he was right. People like Kang Minyi did not live normal lives, and anybody close to them became vulnerable, including her sick mother. Grace lowered her voice. Then maybe you should stop looking at me like that. Minyi stepped even closer now, close enough for her breathing to become uneven again. I tried. Her heart nearly stopped. Minyi, the way she finally said his name softly affected him instantly. For a brief dangerous second, he almost touched her face, almost pulled her closer, but one bodyguard suddenly returned. Sir, we need to move now. The moment shattered immediately. Minyi slowly stepped back again, but his eyes never left Grace. Stay at the hospital tonight, he said calmly. What? It's safer. Grace frowned. You really think somebody would hurt me? Minyi answered without hesitation. Yes. Fear moved quietly through her chest, because he sounded completely serious. Then before she could answer again, Minyi suddenly reached into his coat pocket and handed her a black card. Grace stared down at it. What's this? A direct number. She looked confused. You're giving me your private contact. If anything happens, you call me immediately. Grace looked back up slowly. Nobody reaches you directly, do they? Minyi's expression remained calm. No. That answer strangely affected her more than expensive gifts ever could, because somehow she understood what he was really saying. You matter differently. Then the feared Korean Mafia boss turned and walked away, surrounded by armed men once again. Grace watched him disappear down the hallway while her chest tightened painfully, because for the first time in years somebody dangerous had started feeling important to her too. And deep down, that terrified her. Grace stood near the hospital window long after Kang Minyi disappeared down the hallway. Rain had started falling again outside. Seoul looked cold, lonely, dangerous. And somehow her heart now felt connected to the most dangerous man inside it. She looked down at the black card still resting in her hand. Simple, elegant, only one number written across it, nothing else. No title, no company name, no explanation, just direct access to Kang Minyi himself. Grace shook her head slowly. This man is going to ruin my peace, she whispered. But deep down she already knew her peace disappeared the moment she said hello behind him that night. 3 days passed, 3 long days. Grace remained mostly at the hospital beside her mother while Minyi handled problems within his organization. But despite the distance, he still appeared everywhere in her life. Flowers arrived every morning. Doctors suddenly became more attentive. Her mother's surgery was officially scheduled. And every hospital bill quietly disappeared before Grace could even look at it. Each time she asked questions, the nurses simply smiled nervously. Boss Kang handled it already. By the 4th day, Grace finally became frustrated enough to call him. The line answered immediately. Grace blinked. You answered fast. I was expecting your call, of course he was. Grace walked slowly through the empty hospital hallway while holding the phone tighter. You paid the bills again. Yes. Minyi. Can't keep doing things like this. His voice remained calm. I can, Grace sighed heavily. That's not the point. Then explain the point. Was this man so difficult? Grace leaned against the wall tiredly. You barely know me. I know you're pretending this doesn't matter to you. Her chest tightened instantly. You think you know everything. No, Minyi answered quietly. I only know I think about you constantly. Hit the line heavily. Grace closed her eyes. There he went again, saying impossible things so calmly. Why are you doing this to me? She whispered. For the first time since meeting him, Minyi's voice softened completely. Because the moment I heard your voice behind me, something in me stopped fighting. Grace felt her heart ache painfully. Nobody had ever spoken to her this way before, not with pity, not with lust, not temporarily. But like she mattered deeply already. Before she could answer, loud shouting suddenly exploded downstairs inside the hospital. Grace frowned immediately. What was that? Then screams followed. People began running through the hallway. Grace's heartbeat instantly sped up. What's happening? A terrified nurse rushed past. Get inside the rooms. The phone line suddenly became colder. Grace, Minyi said sharply. What? Where are you exactly? 3rd floor. Carefully, go lock yourself inside your mother's room now. Fear rushed through her chest immediately. Why? But Minyi was already shouting orders at somebody else nearby. Move the vehicles now. Then the call ended. Grace stood frozen for only 1 second before armed men suddenly entered the hospital downstairs. Patients screamed. Security guards ran. Chaos exploded everywhere. Grace's eyes widened in horror. Oh my God, this was because of him. One terrified nurse grabbed Grace's arm. Come. They hurried toward the hospital room quickly. Inside, Grace immediately locked the door while her mother looked frightened from the bed. Grace, what's happening? Grace's hands shook badly now. I don't know. Deep down she did know. Minutes later, heavy footsteps echoed outside the hallway. Voices shouted. Something crashed loudly. Then gunshots exploded. Grace covered her mouth immediately. Her mother gasped in fear. The nightmare had reached them. Meanwhile, outside, Kang Min-yi's convoy screeched violently into the hospital entrance. The moment he stepped out, his face looked terrifying, not calm anymore, not controlled anymore, furious. One bodyguard rushed toward him. Sung Min entered 10 minutes ago. Floor. Third. Min-yi immediately grabbed a weapon from another guard. Boss, it could be a trap. Min-yi's eyes became deadly. They targeted her. Nobody spoke again. Because everybody standing there suddenly understood something terrifying. Their cold mafia boss was emotionally attached now. And emotionally attached men became dangerous, very dangerous. Inside the hospital hallway, Sung Min searched room by room aggressively. Find the woman. Grace held her mother tightly while trying not to panic. Then suddenly, heavy fighting erupted outside. Men shouted violently, more gunshots exploded. Then silence. A few seconds later, the hospital room door opened. Grace gasped loudly. Min-yi entered breathing heavily while holding a weapon. His expensive suit now carried blood stains. The sight shocked her completely, not because he looked frightening, but because his eyes immediately softened after seeing her alive. You're okay. Grace could barely speak. You came. Min-yi walked toward her instantly. I told you to call me if anything happened. They started shooting before I could think. Min-yi grabbed her face gently with both hands. The sudden touch silenced her completely. Did they hurt you? Grace slowly shook her head. For several seconds, neither of them moved. And suddenly Grace understood something terrifying too. This man truly would burn the world down for her. One bodyguard entered quickly. Boss, we secured the building. Min-yi never looked away from Grace. Good. Then Grace's mother suddenly spoke weakly from the bed. You love my daughter. The entire room became quiet. Min-yi finally looked toward the older woman. And for the first time in many years, the feared mafia boss answered honestly without hesitation. Grace's breath caught instantly. The word hit harder than she expected, because he meant it completely. Min-yi looked back toward Grace slowly. I tried to ignore it. Her eyes filled slightly. Min-yi, but every time I saw you hurting, I wanted to protect you. Grace's heart trembled painfully. You barely know me. I know enough. It was again the same words, the same certainty, the same impossible sincerity. Then suddenly Grace laughed through tears. You are seriously insane. For the first time since entering the hospital covered in blood, Kang Min-yi smiled fully. A real smile, warm, beautiful, and completely devastating to her heart. Several weeks later, Seoul exploded with rumors. The feared Korean mafia boss had changed. He rejected powerful marriage arrangements publicly, stopped attending elite social gatherings, spent more time at hospitals than luxury clubs, and worst of all for Seoul's wealthy families. He was constantly seen beside a plus-size black woman named Grace Joanna. People talked endlessly. Some mocked, some criticized, some insulted Grace online cruelly. But none of it mattered anymore, because every single time somebody insulted her publicly, Kang Min-yi responded personally. And nobody in Seoul wanted problems with Kang Min-yi. 1 month later, Grace's mother finally recovered successfully after surgery. That evening, Grace stood outside the hospital helping her mother into a wheelchair. You're free now? Grace smiled emotionally. Her mother squeezed her hand gently, thanks to him. Grace looked across the parking area. Min-yi stood beside his vehicle waiting quietly. Even from far away, he watched her carefully, always watching, always protecting. Her mother smiled knowingly. He looks at you like you're his entire world. Grace's cheeks warmed slightly. He's intense. He loves you. Grace looked down quietly, because now she loved him too. The realization no longer scared her. It simply felt true. That night, Min-yi brought Grace and her mother to a massive private dinner organized by powerful elites. The ballroom looked luxurious beyond imagination. Politicians, business owners, famous celebrities, every important person in Seoul seemed present. The moment Grace entered beside Min-yi, whispers exploded everywhere. That's her. Black woman. She's the one. Grace immediately felt nervous. But before insecurity could fully enter her chest, Min-yi reached for her hand openly, publicly. The entire ballroom became silent. Grace looked up at him in shock. You don't have to do that, she whispered. He answered calmly. I do. Then together they walked deeper into the ballroom. Several wealthy women looked furious. Older men whispered disapprovingly. Even Min-yi's mother stood nearby watching silently. But Kang Minyi ignored everybody, because for the first time in his life, nothing mattered more than the woman beside him. One businessman finally laughed awkwardly. Boss Kang certainly surprised all of Seoul. Minyi looked toward him calmly. Good. Man cleared his throat nervously. I think people simply did not expect your choice. Insult underneath the sentence was obvious. Grace felt it immediately, but before embarrassment could rise inside her, Minyi spoke, coldly, clearly, proudly. Choice is the best decision I have ever made. The room became completely silent. Grace's eyes widened slowly, and Minyi continued. You all searched for perfect women to place beside me. His arm tightened gently around Grace's hand. But the only woman who ever gave me peace was her. Nobody spoke. Nobody moved. Minyi looked directly at Grace now. And the dangerous mafia boss who once feared love finally allowed the truth to fully show inside his eyes. From the moment you said hello behind me, Grace's breath trembled. My heart already knew you belonged with me. Her eyes instantly. Because after all the fear, all the danger, all the judgment, he still chose her publicly, completely. Without shame, Grace laughed softly through tears. You really decided all that before even seeing my face? Minyi stepped closer slowly. That's crazy. I know. Then finally, in front of the entire ballroom, Kang Minyi kissed her gently. And for the first time in years, the feared Korean mafia boss looked completely at peace. Months later, stories about them spread across Seoul endlessly. Some people still judged, some people still whispered, but none of it mattered anymore. Because Grace Joanna no longer saw the terrifying mafia boss the world feared. She saw the man who heard her voice one rainy night and decided his heart had finally found home. If you enjoyed this emotional mafia romance story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, like this video, and turn on notifications for more powerful love stories like this one.